Hi everyone, John here with Fountain Pen Love, and in today's video I want to show you a doodle pattern that I like to call shapes. Now this is similar to the circles pattern that I did a while back, but it's more complicated because instead of doing circles you're doing straight lines, and these can get a little tricky to line up once in a while. Still, don't worry, I'm going to guide you through the process and you don't have to do the harder shapes if you don't want to. You can stick with some of the easier ones and it's still going to look great. So go ahead and grab a pen and paper, find somewhere comfortable to sit down, and let's doodle. Okay, for this shapes pattern, I want to show you a couple different examples that I like to do, and I'll show you how to do each of these variations in the video here. To start off, you can do this version. This is kind of a random version. I have these floating pieces out here, but the main thing to pay attention to is this straight line that everything kind of comes off of. This is nice. It gives you a base to work from, kind of limits how far you go, and I think it just looks really cool too. So this is one version. I'll do this second and show you how I like to do that one. The other version, which is what I'm going to start off with, is pretty much just this standalone version. So it's really like any other doodle I would do. It's just kind of this floating pattern in the middle of the page here. This is really similar to the circles pattern that I did before, but instead of circles, these are shapes with straight edges instead of curved edges. So once you kind of see that, you'll see that it's very, very similar. The only difference is you're drawing squares, triangles, and these other random shapes instead of a circle every single time. So with that in mind, let's dive in and start the shapes pattern. All right, so first thing we want to do is start off with a blank sheet of paper. I like to keep this piece of paper underneath in case there's any bleed through, but it also just makes it a little more pleasant to write on when I'm on a hard countertop like this. I do like to have my piece of paper on top to protect the paper that I'm doodling on from skin oils. Just be careful with smearing as you're moving this around. And let's go ahead and dive in. So the way I'm going to do this isn't normally how I would start this doodle, but I think for this video it's going to help just to kind of show the different shapes that we can use, and also the pros and cons to each one. I am going to draw each one separately, and then we'll do some connecting shapes so they all start to kind of come together and overlap in the middle here. So the first shape and the easiest shape to draw for this pattern is a square. Now, just like with the circles pattern, you're just going to start off with a small square. You're going to draw one that's a little bit bigger. You're going to draw one that's a little bit bigger. And again, similar to the circles pattern, I like to do 5 squares, or whatever shape I'm doing. It doesn't have to be 5, it could just be 4, but 5 usually seems like a good balance between enough lines and shape size to where it doesn't look too small, but it gives me plenty to work with as far as the covering up the paper goes, so I don't end up with just a bunch of really small shapes. So the square, you can see, not too tricky. I mentioned in my one of my first videos, I personally don't like drawing lines up away from me. I like to pull the pen towards me. And you can see why here. These lines where I pulled the pen towards me are straight. The ones where I went away from me are a little wavy. If that bothers you, feel free to rotate the paper. I personally don't like to rotate the paper a ton in this pattern because you're just doing it so often for each little side that you draw. It takes more time than it's worth, in my opinion. So I just kind of put up with some of these shaky lines, and once I start a shape, I typically kind of have the paper fixed for each side that I draw. And I might rotate the page when I start a new shape, but that's just personal preference. You can do yours however you'd like to. So the square, like I said, is the easiest one to start off with. Another one that is surprisingly difficult, but is also really useful in this pattern, is a triangle. Now the triangle is fairly complicated. The first one's easy, but you'll quickly discover as you start drawing these outer ones, getting the spacing on each side consistent is hard, because you need to start, you can't just start at a corner and go from there. It's I don't know, it's made much more difficult because of the point that you're working with here. And you can see I'm already kind of getting off on the distance from, between these two lines and these two lines, but that's okay. I know every time I draw a triangle it's not going to be perfect, and so I just kind of, accept that there's going to be some weirdness happening. Luckily this pattern is busy enough, any little mistakes do tend to get covered up. And you can see here the issue I'm going to run into. If I come straight down, I'm going to run right into this line, so I need to extend this one out a bit more. Doesn't look that great because I did that, but it's better than just running into this line that I had right here. So that's one of the issues I think with triangles, is that just judging where to start a line is one of the hardest parts, and you have these collisions if you're not careful. So don't be afraid to extend a line if you need to. Always kind of look ahead when you're doing a triangle and see where your lines are going to go. So that's the second shape that I like to use. The third shape is kind of, I don't even know what to call it, but I'm just gonna draw it and you can see what it looks like. Let's go ahead and put it up here. So it's similar to a square where it's going to have 3 sides, but then one might be higher than the other. So it's kind of got a point on one side and 3 sides that are straight. So this is kind of like a triangle. You run into this issue with where to start and stop your point, but it does give you some nice variation. Do this. There we go. Let's do one more side, so we have 5. At least with this one you can kind of overshoot this point here and connect it back up again. Now you can do a variation on this. Also, I do like to rotate my paper some so that all of my flat bottoms are not in a line here. You can do a third variation, or a variation on this particular shape if we do, kind of the same thing with the square. And maybe the first one is the same, but the second one, you can come in here and add like a little variation, a straight edge, make it kind of look like an M. And at this point, I want to make sure you understand or accept the fact that these shapes can change. I can kind of see how I'm pushing this side up, whereas this one was flat, and it's kind of starting to change over time. I've found I do like the way that looks, where the shape kind of morphs as it radiates out from the center. So I might start to make it a little more extreme. So where this one was straight down, this one it's kind of gradually coming up together. I'm never gonna make it touch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So that's 5. I'm gonna call this shape done here. I'm never gonna make them come together, but they don't have to be the exact same every single time. We can kind of have this changing or morphing as the shape progresses. So now I have 4 different shapes here. These are kind of the base shapes that I use for this doodle pattern. And to go ahead and fill it out, I'm just gonna repeat these in random ways. But similar to the circles pattern, I'm gonna have them kind of overlap with each other, where I might have a shape start here and then it'll, go under this. You won't physically see it go under, but it's gonna look like it goes under these 2 shapes if it starts in the middle of them. So let's go ahead and do that. I don't want all my straight lines to line up here, so I'm gonna turn my paper this direction. Actually, let's kind of go at an angle here. And let's see how this works. I'm gonna do a triangle since both of these are straight lines going this way. I'm gonna do a triangle maybe going in here. And so another thing that makes this a little more difficult than the circles pattern is you'll have straight lines that start to line up with each other, and that doesn't look as good as having them kind of intersect with each other at an angle. So in this one I drew the triangle so that I didn't have a straight line that was parallel to either of these, and you'll see that it's going to run into each of these at a certain angle where it doesn't line up with it perfectly, and that's what I'm looking for. I don't want it to perfectly line up so that everything is just in a row across my doodle. Now you can see here, I already have a point where just 2 lines in, it's going to start to disappear under these. So I'm just going to draw this line here so it's parallel with this, have it come out here. The third one, or sorry, fourth one, is going to go out here. Going to continue it over here. And then the fifth one is way up here. So you can see this pattern also takes a little bit of, I guess, like spatial awareness, where it doesn't seem like this line should go all the way up here and intersect on this particular shape up here. But if I were to continue this line here and then coming back down here to this one, you can see it would really go this far up on this pattern or on this particular shape. So it's a little tricky to do in that you have so many different things that you're keeping an eye on. You're trying to get your triangles to work in the first place. You're trying to make sure that you don't have too many lines that are parallel with each other so they intersect at these nice angles, and you have some differentiation between the shapes. You also need to kind of project where your line is supposed to go when it runs underneath another shape. So although the shapes themselves are basic, square, triangle, whatever this thing is, the way that they interact with each other is a lot more complicated. So that's why I say this is a bit more of an advanced, a bit more complicated pattern, especially when you compare it to circles. The circles are much, much easier to draw. So let's go ahead and do another one in here. I'm going to do a square right here. And again, I want to kind of start it out so that I'm not running parallel to any of these existing lines. A lot of times you'll find you may guess wrong. You may have lines that kind of change shape as it progresses, and that's okay. You can't have every single one be perfect and distinct from the shape next to it. Ooh, I think I picked up a little bit of paper in there. My line just got really fat. There we go, that's better. You ever have that happen where it snags the paper just a tiny bit and then you're running with some extra fibers underneath your nib, and then it just makes it a really big line. Okay. All right, so there's a square. Now at this point, I want to point out that if you don't do anything to this, if you just keep drawing shapes, it's gonna look fine. But I do like to have a little bit of separation between the shapes. In here was a tiny little space that didn't get filled in. I'm just gonna fill that in. Another thing that you can do to kind of separate these and differentiate each one so it's not just a bunch of lines is I like to personally just kind of fill in the middle shape of each one so it stands out. So this started as a square, this started as a triangle, this started as a, what are they, rhomboids or whatever this random four-sided shape is. That's one way that you can do it. You can also do similar to my circle shape that I showed you, or circles pattern, and fill in every other line. Personally, I don't know if I like to do that as much in this pattern. You could do it for sure. It'll definitely make everything separate and stand out. But I'm not gonna do it for this one. I'm just gonna keep on going with shapes and fill in the center shape. So let me fill this pattern out just a little bit. You can keep on doodling and we'll come back once I have a bit more down. now you can see here, I kind of made a mistake where, it's not a mistake, but I did what I said I don't like to do, where this square's line, one of the lines is parallel with this triangle's, and it completely just intersects right there where there's really no difference between the two. Like I said, it's unavoidable. It's going to happen at some point. You can't have every single angle be distinct and unique. If that happens, just roll with it. Not a huge deal at all. It's not going to, be really noticeable once your doodle is finished. So it's just going to be one of those things where you accept it happens and you move on. Now at this point, I also like to take these large spaces in the middle here and fill them in. I think it's one of those things where if I were to try and fill it in with another shape, it's just too many lines. I don't want to do that. And so I just like to fill those in so we have kind of some nice separation between the shapes and big, patches of color. I also like to color, so I like filling in these spaces with ink. So personally, I really like the way that looks better than empty space. If you like to leave it empty, you are more than welcome to. There's nothing right or wrong about either way. So I'm going to go ahead and do some more shapes here and come back in just a bit. Okay, now you might notice on this triangle, I'm doing more of a right triangle than, just one of these where each angle is different. I have a 90-degree angle here. That's kind of one way that I like to change up the triangles a little bit. It's also a good way to make it a little bit easier to draw, so you don't have as many angles to think about. A right angle is really easy to work with compared to these just different angles that you have to kind of guess the right distance to go away from the corner. So if you do find yourself running into issues with triangles, you can always change it up and draw right triangles where you have a 90-degree angle in there. I do find it makes it significantly easier to draw them than compared to some of these other ones here. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and stop this particular doodle right here. It's not done. I could definitely go a lot more. I could fill it out if I wanted to, but I want to move on and show you the other variation that I was talking about where we have a straight line that we work off of instead of just kind of everything floating out here in the middle. So I'm gonna grab another piece of paper and we will, actually, you know what? I'll just do it on the same paper. There's nothing wrong with that. We'll put it up here and we will start the next variation of this doodle. So to do that, I like to start off with a straight line. This is my protective sheet that I've been using on top, but it also makes a straight line that I can draw with. Now, I don't know if you've ever drawn a straight line with a fountain pen and a hard edge, like a ruler or something. You want to be careful when you do it. It's just like drawing a straight line with anything else, but you want to, see, even there I did it, I smeared it. You want to pull, if anything, you want to lift it directly up because that wet ink on the surface will pull and smear. You definitely don't want to go towards the ink. Ideally, you draw the line, lift the paper straight up, and you'd have a nice crisp line there. On this one, I did end up smearing it a bit, but you know what? That's how it goes. Not a huge deal. I'm going to roll with it and see what happens. So this is kind of down at the bottom here. It's going to be a little bit tricky at first, but let's try this out. So it's the same exact thing we did up here with these shapes, only you're starting with a flat line that everything comes off of. So I'm going to start off just with a square. Same exact thing, only I'm not drawing that bottom line every time. It's already drawn in for me. So there's 5. Again, I like doing 5 layers. You could do 4 if you want. You could do, 3, 6, whatever floats your boat, whatever you find is easiest. Personally, for me, I think it's 5. With this, when I'm doing this line, it's kind of like this where I draw some lines or some shapes to start out with. You know, I might do a square, might do a triangle over here. Oops, and you see that's the trick with triangles, is you'll have this kind of thing happen, where the lines just run into each other because you didn't quite start out in the right place. Alright, so there's a triangle. Maybe let's do one of these weird M shapes over here. And you can see that's a little different from any one I've done before. Not every shape has to be the exact same. You can have little variations every single time. So I have these three kind of base shapes here. I also like to draw some kind of floating up here above the line. And you'll see why in just a little bit here. Alright, so one more on this. Okay, so let's say this is good for now. I'm gonna use this as kind of my starting point. These are my standalone shapes. Now I'm gonna go in and start doing the same thing, but they're gonna start intersecting with these shapes. So maybe I want a, let's say, a square right here. And you can see it's gonna intersect with this square up here, but since they're going in different directions, we don't have the parallel line issue that we had up above here at that one point. If both these squares were parallel, I don't think this would look very good, so I probably would have drawn a different shape in here. Now I want to definitely keep keep the parallel lines in mind. I'm going to do a triangle right here. And looks like that's 1, 2, 3, 4. I guess I could get one more in here. Just kind of squeeze it in. Okay. Also go ahead and fill in these center parts to each shape. Like I said, I do that. I think it kind of keeps them distinct where you see what the base shape is at least. Alright, let's go ahead and let's flip this over and do a shape up here. Make it a little, I guess just like that. Kind of do this M shape. And you see here, this one line, this one side, completely intersected with this triangle. It's the exact same direction, exactly, they're parallel. That's okay. Like I said, it is unavoidable. Even if you try and avoid it, it's gonna happen at some point. So don't feel bad if it happens to you multiple times in the same doodle. That's just how it goes. All right, let's do one more here. Alright, and finally let's do an upside down triangle here. Well, maybe like not quite upside down. Let's see, 4. Okay, you can see this is coming along nicely. I'm going to go ahead and fill in these blank spaces in here just to kind of give a little bit of separation between the shapes. Okay, and you could see how this could easily keep on growing off of this baseline. You can add some shapes up here. The one reason I do like this is it doesn't have to be big. I think you could just leave it like this and it would look fine. It doesn't have to be a full page doodle. I really liked doing these in my bullet journal and having just nice little shapes in here that took, you know, a couple minutes each to do, just as space fillers where I didn't fill up the entire page. So definitely if you want a smaller doodle that is quick and easy to do, draw this line and you can start with that. Okay, now let's see how this works with different nib sizes. If I were to use a fine nib, what I can do, I think it's going to be pretty easy to do with a fine nib because you're not going to have as much chance of the lines running into each other. So you can definitely go fine on this one. I would recommend it if you're having trouble with a medium nib. If the lines are just too chunky, if you're having issues with shapes colliding and sides merging, a fine is going to be the way to go. I do think that a broad or even a really wet medium is going to be really difficult to use for this particular pattern. This is a pretty wet medium that I've got with a wet ink as well, and I do think it will work if you're careful, but at some point you're probably going to have sides that run into each other, especially if you try and keep them close together, and it's going to get frustrating. So definitely choose your nib and your ink also very wisely for this pattern. The finer the better. A drier ink, or at least not a super wet ink, will probably be nice as well. I'm going to predict if I try and do a triangle, might have some issues here. Let's see if I can do this. Oops. No, it's not doing too bad. That's a little out there. Whoa. All right, so a wet medium should work okay, but again, you'll just have to be more careful, take your time. This got kind of out of control because I just started going off in a different direction. I also want to show you what it looks like if you do fill in every other layer, like I did with the circles pattern. It's not a bad look for this doodle. It does help give it a little more variation, and it's not so just a doodle full of solid lines. But it's not, for some reason, I love the way it looks for the circles. I don't like it so much for this particular pattern. So you can do it if you want to. There's nothing wrong with it. It doesn't look bad by any means. For some reason, I just like the open nature of the straight lines and how they look when they're not filled in. But you are more than welcome to fill them in if you want to. If you do, again, I would suggest you leave the outside layer open so that the shapes don't merge together. If the outside layer of each one is colored, then when you do fill in the adjacent shapes, you're going to have just a blending of colors as this part gets filled in, and it doesn't look good in my opinion. So I always like to keep the outside layer uncolored when I do this filling in of the shapes, but you can do that however you'd like, and I think as long as you leave the outside one open, you're going to be in good shape there. So let's go ahead and wrap this up. Come back here to the original doodle that I did. I really do think this is a fun pattern to do. It is a little more complicated. It takes a little more concentration, it takes a little more patience, because these triangles are not easy to draw. These random shapes are not easy to draw. You have these parallel lines that you kind of want to avoid if possible. So there's a lot to think about when you're doing this doodle, but don't let that turn you away from it. Definitely give it a try. Give it more than one try, because your first one probably will not work out very well. I know it took me a while to get comfortable with it, so definitely try a few different times, different pens, different inks, and see which shapes you like the best. You don't have to have all these shapes. You could just do squares. You could just do triangles. You could just do random weird shapes that morph every single time. It's your doodle. It's totally up to you how you do it, but give it a try. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe, and I will see you next time with more doodles.